Day meet in Belarus near the Ukrainian border. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says he does not expect a breakthrough, but is willing to send a delegation to try and end the war. It was calm as the sun rose over the capital Kiev, though Ukraine said there were sporadic pre-dawn blasts there, and in the second largest city, Kharkiv. Ukraine says it is still in control of all major cities, despite the Russian onslaught in many parts of the country. Several residential buildings have been hit, and Ukraine says over 350 civilians have been killed so far. Weapons of war at a children's playground in Roddur there in western Ukraine. Ukrainian civilians have been pitching in to resist the Russian invasion. With their lives turned upside down, ordinary Ukrainians are getting involved in collecting donations and helping to make supplies for the army. DW correspondent Matthias Böninger met some volunteers helping refugees and soldiers in the city of Vinnytsia, southwest of Kiev.
They bring everything they can spare: clothes, food, money. As refugees move west and soldiers east towards the front, here in Vinnytsia in central Ukraine, people are organizing aid for both. Natalia, who doesn't want to give her last name, leads a youth center in peacetime. She's used to organizing outings in summer camps. Now, at war, she's busy directing volunteers and sorting donations. I never imagined I'd be
Ukraine, but they haven't progressed as far as many had expected in Ukraine. How do you explain that?
Well, many in the West, all in the West, have been surprised by this. There are maybe different reasons for this. One is what the Pentagon last night called the creative resistance difference, because Ukrainian air defense, strange enough, is still working. There is no Russian air superiority so far. That's also a surprise for most Western experts, because everybody expected that Russia would take over the skies over Ukraine within a day.
Right. Now, the Economist news outlet has suggested that the sanctions imposed on Russia, particularly on the central bank, are so crippling that the Kremlin might interpret them as an act of war. Do these sanctions have any military significance?
Is an economic giant but a military midget. So no, that's not going to happen overnight. And he absolutely acknowledged that and said that's why we will now be investing more than 2%. 2% is the NATO target, 2% of GDP on defense spending. He said we will now be doing more than that. And
currently it's 1.5%.
Yeah, way below. Been promising to do it for years and years, since 2014. Every year Germany makes this promise. It looks like now it actually might happen.
Suddenly, overnight, standing up against Vladimir Putin's war.
They were chanting no to war in Russia from St. Petersburg to Siberia, protesting their country's invasion of Ukraine.
Russians support their government. State TV propaganda denies that there is fighting in Kyiv. There's not a word about civilian casualties or attacks on civilian targets. It's not a war at all. People here are collecting aid supplies, but solely for civilians their tanks arriving to the rescue. It's not a war, it's a special military operation against Nazis who have seized power in Ukraine.
But the Ukrainian president is Jewish. How can he also be a Nazi?
We live in surprising times.
Of course I support our Putin. It's not a war, just a special military operation.
Backing for their president from many Russians. While those who oppose him Ukraine and Russia are due to start this morning as Russia's invasion of its neighbors opens its fifth day. The two sides are expected to meet in Belarus near the Ukrainian border. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says he doesn't expect a breakthrough, but he's willing to send a delegation to try and end the war. It was calm as the sun rose over the capital, Kiev, though Ukraine said there were sporadic pre-dawn blasts there. And in the second largest city, Kharkiv, Ukraine says it's still in control of all major cities despite the Russian onslaught. Has plunged to a record low, dropping more than 30% against the U.S. dollar. This comes after the U.S. and Europe imposed sanctions aimed at cutting the country off from the global financial system. Scrambling to withdraw money from cash machines to be soon across the country. In an attempt to prop up the ruble, Russia's central bank doubled its key interest rate to an unprecedented 20% and ordered domestic export companies to sell foreign reserves. Its voice against Russia over its invasion of Ukraine. The United Nations Security Council has called a rare emergency meeting of the 190-member General Assembly to take place today. 11 of the Council's 13 members voted in favor of the referendum resolution. Russia voted against the move, while China, India, and the United Arab Emirates abstained. Russia was unable to use its veto to block the resolution. This vote was procedural. The U.S. and its allies of the UN say Russia is becoming isolated. The European Union has decided to finance the purchase and delivery of weapons. Says the bloc is also closing its airspace to Russian aircraft and will ban state-owned media channels Russia Today and Sputnik. They also announced new sanctions targeting the regime of Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko for supporting Russia's invasion. Here's how von der Leyen explained the significance. Papers enters its fifth
Cities as varied as Paris, Erbil in Kurdish Iraq, Santiago, Chile, and the Lithuanian capital Vilnius, where expat Belarusians protested their country's support for the invasion, also without police interference. But back inside Russia, in Yekaterinburg, east of the Ural Mountains, the voices of protest quickly muffled.
While people around the world protest Putin's war against Ukraine, many in Russia, of course, are backing the president. Russian media have repeated Putin's claim that the so-called special military operation was a reaction to Ukrainian aggression. Those who attempt to protest, as we saw, are quickly silenced.
A protest that isn't technically allowed to be one will therefore be broken up here in Moscow. A heavy police presence means that many don't even dare to protest out of fear of arrest.
We don't agree with what's happening. We're in shock. We don't know how to express this because no one listens to us. We are being persecuted and beaten. We're afraid to go out on the street because we're immediately detained. Every word we say is met with hostility. We simply don't get a chance to join a legal protest.
I didn't even try. I've seen how quickly people were detained when they came out with anything. Protesters gathered in around 50 Russian cities on Sunday. Demonstrations were particularly large here in St. Petersburg. Across the country, 2,500 protesters were detained, according to human rights groups. But many Russians support their government. State TV propaganda denies that there is fighting in Kyiv. There's not a word about civilian casualties or attacks on civilian targets. It's not a war at all. People here are collecting aid supplies, but solely for the civilians evacuated to Russia from the separatist regions. Many are convinced that their tanks are riding to the rescue. It's not a war, it's a special military operation against Nazis who have seized power in Ukraine.
But the Ukrainian president is Jewish. How can he also be a Nazi?
We live in surprising times.
Of course I support our Putin. It's not a war, just a special military operation.
Backing for their president from many Russians, while those who oppose him face ending up behind bars.
Well, peace talks between Ukraine and Russia are due to start this morning as Russia's invasion of its neighbors enters its fifth day. The two sides are expected to meet in Belarus near the Ukrainian border. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says he doesn't expect a breakthrough, but he's willing to send a delegation to try and end the war. It was calm as the sun rose over the capital, Kiev, though Ukraine said there were sporadic pre-dawn blasts there. And in the second largest city, Kharkiv, Ukraine says it's still in control of all major cities despite the Russian onslaught in many parts of the country. Several residential buildings have been hit, and Ukraine says over 350 civilians have been killed so far. You are watching special coverage of the war in Ukraine here on DWTV. I'm Terry Martin. The Russian ruble has plunged to a record low, dropping more than 30% against the U.S. dollar. This comes after the U.S. and Europe imposed sanctions aimed at cutting the country off from the global financial system. Long queues of Russians scrambling to withdraw money from cash machines can be seen across the country. In an attempt to prop up the ruble, Russia's central bank doubled its key interest rate to 20% and ordered domestic export companies to sell foreign reserves. The international community is raising its voice against Russia over its invasion of Ukraine. The United Nations Security Council has called a rare emergency meeting of the 193-member General Assembly due to take place today. 11 of the Council's 15 members voted in favor of the resolution. Russia voted against the move, while China, India, and the United Arab Emirates abstained. Russia was unable to use its veto to block the resolution since the vote was procedural. The U.S. and its allies at the UN say Russia is becoming isolated internationally. The European Union has decided to finance the purchase and delivery of weapons and equipment to Ukraine. It's the first time the EU is sending weapons to a country under attack. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the bloc is also closing its airspace to Russian aircraft and will ban state-owned media channels Russia Today and Sputnik. She also announced new sanctions targeting the regime of Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko for supporting Russia's invasion. Here's how von der Leyen explained the significance of these developments.
As the war in Ukraine rages on and Ukrainians fight bravely for their country, European Union steps up once more in support for Ukraine and the sanctions against the aggressor that is Putin's Russia. For the first time ever, the European Union will finance the purchase and delivery of weapons and other equipment to a country that is under attack. This is a watershed moment.
Before, let's bring in our correspondent Christina Munwa in Brussels. Christine, tell us more about how the EU is moving on Ukraine. What do these latest steps mean?
Well, Terry, the significance of this announcement by the European Union to NATO collectively purchase military weaponry, lethal weaponry for the Ukrainian armed forces cannot be understated. As Ursula von der Leyen there, the EU Commission President, said, it is a watershed moment. It's never happened in the European Union's history. In the weeks leading up to this invasion, we have seen individual member states from the European Union making military contributions to the Ukrainian armed forces, but this was bilateral and was no means coordinated at an EU level. In fact, many people did not expect, when we heard the news yesterday, that this was actually going to happen. People thought, assumed, many people, analysts thought the European Union was going to continue to encourage individual member states to support the Ukrainian armed forces, but to take this collective decision was really, really significant. So they're going to be using an instrument that they created called the European Peace Facility. And we understand that money to the tune of about 450 million euros has been set aside to purchase things like lethal ammunition, air defense systems, anti-tank systems that are then going to be given to the Ukrainian armed forces. This EPF, this European Peace Facility, this instrument, was set up last year. It has been in use, for example, supplying the African Union with assistance, but not lethal assistance, not the kind of ammunition that the Ukrainian armed forces will be getting. So certainly very significant, and is expected to bolster the Ukrainian armed forces as they continue to battle the Russians on the ground.
So something of a watershed moment here for European security and foreign policy as well. Now, Ukraine is aspiring to join the European Union. That's part of what all this conflict is about. Assuming that Ukraine retains its independence, Christine, what are its prospects of actually becoming an EU member state?
Well, in the days after the invasion began, some EU member states opened up that conversation. They made public remarks expressing that Ukraine should be granted a path to accession into the European Union. Poland, for example, Slovakia, for example, the Polish president just this weekend. Also this weekend, we heard from the Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen. She said, and I quote, "They are one of us," referring to Ukraine, and we want them in. Of course, she put a caveat to that to say down the line. You might know, Terry, that in 2008, the Ukrainians did apply for EU membership. That application was unsuccessful for a number of reasons. As quoted by the European Union, they cited the corruption and the need for other reforms. There are some countries already in talks with the European Union right now. Ukraine is not even in talks, but its parliament took the decision in 2017 to adopt a law that made EU membership part of its strategic foreign policy and security policy. It doesn't appear at the moment, Terry, that there are more EU member states who have expressed that keenness, that desire to bring Ukraine into the fold. Of course, there would be implications for the European Union. For example, if Ukraine were to have been a European Union member now, much more would have been needed in terms of perhaps boots on the ground in support of the Ukrainian armed forces. So it does appear that the majority of member states are reserved about that. They've at least not made public remarks, the kind that we've heard from the Polish president, as well as the Slovakian head of state.
So you say the majority of EU member states are reserved about this. So is this crisis in Ukraine, regarding Ukraine, bringing the EU closer together, or is it another source of division?
Terry, the unitedness, if I can call it that we see in the European Union on coming to Ukraine's defense, on condemning Russia, has been something that a lot of people have been taken by surprise. In fact, some analysts have gone as far as to say that even Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin didn't budget for that level of coordination and unity among the European Union member states. It was collective condemnation of Russia's actions from the very get-go, collective decisiveness in terms of the reaction that we've seen in the aftermath of this invasion. There have been meeting after meeting here in Brussels, foreign ministers and the heads of state, some of those meetings virtual, meetings with allies in Washington, the NATO partnership as well. And we've really seen what many call unprecedented unity, even for some member states that have certain issues in the European Union who are known to perhaps lean towards Russia. Even these have come into the fold, not only condemning Russia, but expressing the importance of the European Union. Countries like Hungary, the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban coming out and saying that we need to preserve the European Union, that this is our future. And so these are very unprecedented times, and it really has brought the bloc together in a way that many have been taken by surprise by, Terry.
Christine, thank you very much. Our correspondent Christine Munwa there in Brussels.